These two orchids came home on the same day. They looked equally healthy, they were covered in fresh Phalaenopsis blooms, and both still had unopened buds at the ends of their flower spikes. But before long, one plant had dropped nearly all of its flowers, while the other still looked almost untouched. The difference was not a special fertilizer, a miracle spray, or a more expensive orchid. It came down to a series of small choices involving light, temperature, water, airflow, and where each plant was placed. And before you water an orchid because one flower has started to fade, there is one important sign you need to check first. Not every falling orchid flower means the plant is in trouble. That is the first thing every beginner needs to understand. Orchid flowers are living structures, and each bloom has its own age. Some may have opened before you ever saw the plant at the store. Others may have opened only a few days ago. If the oldest blooms slowly soften and fall one at a time while the buds remain firm, the leaves stay strong, and the roots still look healthy, the plant may simply be moving through the natural end of its flowering cycle. That is very different from bud blast. Bud blast happens when unopened buds stop developing, turn yellow, shrivel, or fall before they open. It can happen after a sudden change in temperature, light, moisture, or general environment. It is also different from whole plant stress, when several flowers and buds change at nearly the same time, and the leaves or roots begin showing problems as well. So before you change anything, look at the pattern. Which flowers opened first? Are the oldest blooms fading before the newer ones? Are the unopened buds still firm and green, or are several of them yellowing together? Did the orchid recently move from a greenhouse to a store, from the store to a car, and from the car into your home? Did it spend time near a cold door, a hot window, or a strong air conditioning vent? The pattern often tells you whether you are seeing normal aging or a plant reacting to stress. The order in which the flowers fade tells us part of the story, but the roots tell us whether watering is involved. Before we examine the roots, though, there is one detail about the orchid's history that can change how you interpret every fading flower. The first tip is to consider the age of the flowers before you change your care routine. A plant that looks completely full at the store may have been in bloom for quite some time. The flowers did not all open on the morning you bought it. In many cases, the blooms closer to the lower part of the spike opened earlier, while the buds near the tip developed later. This does not create a perfect calendar, and flower position alone cannot tell you the exact age of every bloom, but it gives you a useful clue. If one older flower begins to soften while the rest of the display remains firm, do not automatically add water, fertilizer, or a new orchid product. You cannot reverse the natural aging of a bloom by feeding the plant more heavily. You may only disturb a root system that was already functioning well. Instead, step back and evaluate the entire orchid. Look at the unopened buds. Check whether the spike is still green and firm. Look at the leaves for unusual softness or wrinkling. Then look through the pot at the roots and the moisture in the growing medium. This is also useful when choosing an orchid at the store. A plant with every flower fully open may give you an immediate, dramatic display, but some of those flowers may already be well into their natural lifespan. A plant with several fresh flowers and a number of healthy, plump buds may have more of its display still ahead of it. That does not guarantee every bud will open, because transport and environmental changes still matter, but it can help you choose a plant with more potential flowering time remaining. The key is to judge the orchid as a whole. One fading bloom is not the same as a collapsing plant. A green spike, firm leaves, healthy roots, and developing buds all tell you that the orchid may still be doing well even as an older flower finishes. But flower age cannot explain buds that turn yellow only a few days after the orchid comes home. To understand those buds, we need to look at what happened between the store and the place where the orchid is sitting now. The second tip is to reduce transport stress and give the orchid a stable landing place when you bring it home. A blooming orchid may move through several very different environments in a short period. It may leave a warm, humid growing facility, spend time in a brightly lit store, travel to a parking lot, sit in a car, and then enter a heated or air-conditioned home. The leaves may tolerate that journey, but developing buds can be much more sensitive to sudden changes. Do not leave a blooming orchid in a hot parked car while you finish other errands. During cold weather, Do not carry it uncovered through freezing air longer than necessary. Protect the flowers and buds from direct wind, and avoid placing the plant immediately beneath a heating vent or air conditioning outlet when you arrive home. The goal is not to create a perfect greenhouse in your living room. The goal is simply to avoid extreme, rapid changes. Once the orchid is inside, choose a reasonable location and allow the plant to settle. Moving it from the kitchen to the bedroom, then to the bathroom, and then to a different window every few hours makes it harder for the plant to adjust. It also makes it harder for you to understand what is actually causing a problem. A stable location gives both you and the orchid a clearer starting point. It is also important to remember that some flower damage may have begun before you purchased the plant. A bud may already have experienced cold, heat, dryness, or rough handling during transport. If it falls after the orchid reaches your home, that does not automatically mean your care caused the problem. Your job is to protect the remaining healthy flowers and buds from additional stress. Once the orchid is home, the brightest looking spot is not automatically the best place for its flowers. The next test takes only a moment, but it can prevent you from placing the plant against a window that becomes far hotter than the rest of the room. The third tip is to provide bright, indirect light without allowing the flowers and leaves to overheat. Bright, indirect light is one of those phrases that sounds simple until you try to locate it in a real house. It usually means a place where the orchid receives plenty of daylight, but the sun is not beating directly onto the leaves and flowers for long periods, especially during the hottest part of the day. A bright room is not the same as a hot windowsill. Glass can create a small zone of intense heat even when the rest of the room feels comfortable. A south or west-facing window may be gentle during one season and harsh during another. A window that works well in a cloudy northern climate may become too intense in a hot southern summer. That is why there is no single window direction or fixed distance from the glass that works in every American home. Instead, observe the exact place where the orchid will sit. Watch the light at different times of day. Does a hard beam of sun land directly on the flowers? Do the leaves or petals feel noticeably warm? Does the pot sit against hot glass? If so, move the orchid farther into the room or use a sheer curtain to soften the light. You are not trying to hide the plant in a dark corner. You are filtering the strongest heat while keeping the room bright. If the orchid has been in lower light, do not suddenly move it into strong direct sun because you want to help it bloom longer. The rapid change can create additional stress. Make gradual adjustments when possible. A bright, stable location is usually better than moving the orchid between a dim decorative table and an intensely sunny windowsill every day. Good light supports the plant's overall health, but light alone cannot preserve a flower that has already reached the end of its natural lifespan. What it can do is help the orchid maintain energy while avoiding the stress of overheating. And before you move your orchid closer to the window, there is one heat test you should do first. Check the spot at the warmest time of day, not only in the cool morning. Even when the light looks perfect, the flowers may still be reacting to temperature changes you barely notice. That brings us to the difference between a comfortably cool room and a plant being hit by repeated temperature swings. The fourth tip is to keep the temperature around a blooming orchid as stable as reasonably possible. You do not need laboratory control. A normal day and night variation is not automatically harmful. The problem is repeated exposure to sudden extremes. A plant near the front door may receive a burst of cold winter air every time someone enters. A plant beside a fireplace may become very warm in the evening and much cooler after the fire goes out. A windowsill may heat up in direct sun and cool rapidly after sunset. The thermostat on the wall does not always describe what the orchid experiences. A room may read as comfortable while the plant sits in a much hotter or colder microclimate. That is why you should evaluate the exact spot, not just the room. Stand where the orchid sits. Notice whether a door opens nearby, whether a heater cycles on and off, or whether hot air from the kitchen reaches the flowers. A stable temperature will not make an old flower young again, but it can reduce unnecessary stress on buds that are still developing. Buds are often the first part of the display to react when the environment changes abruptly. They may stop growing, yellow, or fall even while the leaves still look normal. Return for a moment to our two orchids. The plant that kept more of its flowers remained on a table near a bright window, but it was not pressed against the glass, and it was not beside an exterior door. The other plant was placed where the temperature changed more often. That difference may not have been enough by itself to explain every lost flower, but it added another layer of stress. A room can have a comfortable temperature, while the orchid itself is sitting in a stream of air that is much colder, hotter, or drier. So the next check is not the thermostat. It is the air moving around the flowers. The fifth tip is to avoid direct airflow from air conditioning vents, heating vents, strong fans, and space heaters. Gentle air circulation is not the enemy. Orchids benefit from fresh air moving through the growing area. The problem is a concentrated stream blowing directly across the flowers, buds, and pot for hours at a time. Some of the worst locations are easy to miss. The orchid may be on a beautiful shelf beneath a ceiling vent. It may sit near a floor register that sends warm air upward. It may be directly in front of a window air conditioner or beside a fan used to cool the room. The plant can look perfectly placed until the system turns on. You can test this without special equipment. Hold your hand near the flowers when the heating or cooling system is running. Watch a small, lightweight piece of paper near the plant. If it moves continuously in one direction, the orchid may be sitting in a direct stream. Move the plant a short distance out of that path while keeping it in the same bright room. Direct airflow can also change how quickly the pot dries. If you move an orchid from a still room to a breezy location, the roots and growing medium may dry faster than before. If you move it away from a vent, the medium may remain moist longer. This is another reason not to rely on a rigid watering schedule. The plant's environment changes the speed at which it uses and loses water. This was one of the hidden differences between the two orchids. The plant that lost flowers first had spent time close to an HVAC stream. That does not prove the vent caused every flower to drop, but it helps explain why the plant experienced more environmental fluctuation than the orchid in the stable location. Now, the first orchid looks thirsty because some of its flowers are soft, but the roots are about to tell us something completely different. Before adding a single drop of water, look through the pot and check what the root zone is already holding. The sixth tip is to water according to the roots and the growing medium, not according to the appearance of one fading flower. This is one of the most important habits in orchid care. A soft, aging flower can make the entire plant look thirsty, but the roots may still be surrounded by moisture. Adding more water in that moment does not restore the old flower. It may simply keep the root zone wet for too long. If the orchid is in a transparent pot, look at the roots along the sides. Roots that are green often contain recent moisture. Roots that appear silvery or pale are generally drier. But color is not the only sign. Check the growing medium as well. Bark can dry at a different rate from tightly packed sphagnum moss. The surface of moss may look dry while the center of the pot remains damp. A wooden skewer, the weight of the pot, and visible condensation can all provide additional clues. Lift the pot. A freshly watered orchid often feels heavier than one that has dried considerably. Look deep into the medium if the pot allows it. Ask yourself whether the roots actually need water or whether you are reacting emotionally to a flower that was already old. Do not water by a fixed day of the week unless the orchid consistently reaches the appropriate level of dryness on that day. Homes change with the seasons. Air conditioning, heating, humidity, airflow, pot size, root health, bark condition, and the amount of moss all affect drying time. A plant that needed water every several days in a warm, breezy room may need it less often after being moved away from a vent. When the orchid does need water, wet the root zone thoroughly and allow the excess to drain. The goal is to hydrate the roots, not to leave them soaking. Avoid letting the inner pot stand in a pool of water. Do not add a heavy dose of fertilizer because you want the flowers to last. Strong feeding cannot stop natural flower aging, and stressed roots should not be pushed with concentrated fertilizer. This is where the middle of our story changes. The orchid with soft flowers looked dry from a distance, but its roots were still green and the medium was still damp. More water would have created a second problem. The real stress was not thirst. It was the combination of daily temperature changes, direct airflow, and repeated movement around the house. The lesson is simple but powerful. Inspect first, then act. If the roots are dry and the medium has reached the appropriate point, water the plant. If the roots are still moist, do not use extra water as a treatment for an old bloom. The next sign will tell you whether the flower is simply aging or the whole plant is reacting to stress. Look for changes beyond the flower, including limp leaves, damaged roots, several yellowing buds, or a spike that is declining unusually fast. Even when the roots are watered correctly, the orchid can still remain wet if water is trapped where you cannot see it. That hidden place is often the bottom of the decorative pot. The seventh tip is to empty the cachepot and protect the orchid's drainage. Many store-bought orchids come in a transparent or colored plastic nursery pot that sits inside a decorative ceramic container. The outer pot may look beautiful, but it often has no drainage hole. If you water the orchid without removing the inner pot, excess water can collect at the bottom where the roots may sit in it unnoticed. After watering, lift the nursery pot out of the decorative container and let it drain completely. Then check the bottom of the outer pot and pour away any water that remains. Do not assume the orchid is safe just because the surface of the bark looks dry. The lowest roots may still be standing in water. A decorative container should hold the nursery pot, not function as a sealed reservoir around the roots. If the orchid is planted directly into a pot without proper drainage, the long-term root environment becomes much harder to manage. Healthy roots need both moisture and air. Keeping them submerged or constantly wet can weaken them over time. At the same time, do not repot a blooming orchid only because one flower has faded. Repotting can be necessary when the medium has broken down, the roots are badly damaged, or drainage is unsafe. But natural flower aging alone is not an emergency. If the roots are severely compromised, the health of the plant matters more than preserving every bloom. That is a different situation from an otherwise healthy orchid losing one old flower. When we checked the orchid that lost flowers first, water had occasionally remained in its outer pot after watering. Again, that was not the only difference between the plants, but it added stress around the roots. Several small problems were beginning to overlap. The next watering mistake happens above the pot, where a few drops can remain on the flowers or collect in the center of the plant. Water the roots thoroughly, but allow the parts that need to dry quickly to stay dry. The eighth tip is to avoid routinely soaking the flowers or leaving water trapped in the crown. Misting the petals does not make an orchid flower young again. In some conditions, water sitting on the petals can leave spots or encourage the flower to deteriorate more quickly. The safest approach is to direct most of the water toward the root zone. If water splashes into the crown, the center where the leaves meet, gently remove the excess and help that area dry. You can tip the plant slightly, use the corner of an absorbent paper towel, or increase gentle air movement around the plant. Do not jab between the leaves or blow harshly across the buds. Humidity around the orchid is not the same as keeping the flowers wet. An orchid can benefit from a reasonably comfortable indoor environment without having water sprayed directly onto every bloom. If your home is very dry, focus on the overall placement and the room environment rather than repeatedly coating the flowers with moisture. Also, avoid applying leaf shine, homemade mixtures, or unknown sprays to the flowers. Blooms are delicate, and products designed for foliage or general household plants may not belong on orchid petals. Clean water at the roots and a stable environment are more useful than a cosmetic treatment on the display. Do not panic if a few drops touch a flower. One splash does not mean the bloom will immediately fall. The goal is simply to avoid making wet petals or a wet crown part of the daily routine. Now we come to a problem that has nothing to do with the pot, the window, or the watering can. It may be sitting on the same table as the orchid, inside an ordinary bowl of fruit. The ninth tip is to keep blooming orchids away from ripening fruit, intense kitchen heat, and frequently opened exterior doors. These locations create different kinds of stress, so it helps to understand each one separately. Ripening fruit can release ethylene, a natural plant hormone that affects the aging of flowers. Some orchid flowers are sensitive to it. That does not mean a single banana across the room will destroy your display. It means that placing a blooming orchid directly beside a bowl of ripening bananas, apples, or overripe fruit day after day is unnecessary and easy to avoid. Give the orchid its own space. The kitchen can also change quickly. An island may look like the perfect place to display a beautiful orchid, but the area may receive heat from the stove or oven, steam, grease, and constant activity. Some kitchens have excellent bright locations away from the cooking area, while others are too unstable. Judge the exact spot rather than labeling every kitchen good or bad. Exterior doors create another pattern. Each opening may bring in a wave of hot or cold air, especially during winter or summer. Entry areas also have more foot traffic, making it easier to bump the spike or knock the pot. A console table by the front door may look elegant, but it may not protect delicate buds. This was another difference in our two orchids. The plant that lost flowers first was sometimes displayed near a fruit bowl and in a busy part of the home. The second orchid stayed in a quieter location. No single apple or open door explains the whole result, but these repeated exposures added to the plant's total stress. The final mistake can expose the orchid to several of these problems in one day, even when every individual location seems acceptable. It happens when the orchid is moved again and again in an effort to give it the best of every room. The 10th tip is to choose one good location and keep the blooming orchid reasonably stable. Many people move an orchid to a bright window during the day, place it on the dining table for dinner, move it to another room when guests arrive, and return it to the window the next morning. Each move may change the light, temperature, airflow, humidity, and direction of the flower spike. The plant does not need to remain frozen in one exact inch of space. An occasional movement for watering or cleaning is normal. The problem is a daily routine of large environmental changes. A location that is very good and stable is usually better than several supposedly perfect locations used for only a few hours at a time. Before you move your orchid, use a 3-part placement test. First, check the light. Is the location bright enough for the plant without exposing the flowers and leaves to harsh, heating sun? Second, check temperature and airflow. Is the plant away from exterior doors, direct HVAC streams, heaters, fireplaces, and hot glass? Third, check water and surroundings. Can you remove the pot easily for watering and drainage? Is the orchid away from ripening fruit, cooking heat, and heavy traffic? The best locations are often simple. A table or shelf near a bright window with filtered light, stable room conditions, and no direct vent can work very well. The pot should be easy to lift out, water, drain, and return. The orchid should not be pressed against the glass or hidden in a dark corner. Some locations can work with small adjustments. A windowsill may be suitable if a sheer curtain filters intense sun and the glass does not become too hot or cold. A room with air conditioning can work if the orchid sits outside the direct stream. A kitchen area may work if it is bright, away from the stove, and not beside ripening fruit. A bathroom may provide comfortable humidity, but only if it has enough light and does not remain dark most of the day. The locations most likely to cause trouble are those beside frequently opened doors, directly under vents, next to heaters or fireplaces, against very hot glass, inside decorative pots that hold water, or in places that require the orchid to be moved every day. These are not absolute rules for every house. They are warning signs that tell you to look more closely. Now we can return to the two orchids. The plant that kept most of its flowers did not receive a secret treatment. It stayed in bright, softened light. Its temperature changed less dramatically. It was outside the direct HVAC stream. Its roots were checked before watering, and the decorative pot was emptied after each soak. It was not kept beside ripening fruit, and it was not moved from room to room every day. The orchid that lost flowers first experienced several small stresses at once. Some blooms may already have been older. The plant went through more environmental changes. It spent time in direct airflow. It was moved often. Water sometimes remained in the outer pot. None of these details alone proves exactly why each flower fell, but together they explain why the two plants did not have the same experience. You cannot stop an orchid flower from aging forever, and no care routine can guarantee that every bud will open. What you can do is avoid shortening the display with unnecessary stress. Watch the pattern of fading. Protect the plant during transport. Give it bright, filtered light. Keep the temperature reasonably stable. Move it away from direct vents. Water according to the roots and growing medium. Empty the cachepot. Keep water from sitting on the flowers and in the crown. Avoid ripening fruit, cooking heat, and drafty doors. Then give the orchid one dependable place to settle. And remember, a falling flower does not mean the orchid is dying. Pause before you react. Compare the flowers, buds, leaves, roots, and growing medium, and let the condition of the whole plant guide your next step. When the flowering cycle naturally ends, continue caring for the leaves and roots. Those are the structures that will support the plant long after the final bloom is gone. You cannot keep an orchid flower young forever, but with steady light, careful watering, and a stable place in your home, you can give every healthy bloom the best chance to complete its natural display.